Good afternoon and welcome to the webinar, What's Next for Our Streets, the State of New York City Streets. This is by Transportation Alternatives. My name is Marco Connor DiAquoi, and I am Deputy Director at Transportation Alternatives. I am so pleased and honored to be joined by Betsy Plum, Andrew Rigie, and Shabazz Stuart today. We will be taking a look back at the year that has been 2020, and it has been quite a year in so many ways, and not least when it comes to our street space. And we will be looking ahead to discuss what we expect to come next and what our panelists believe should be happening with our streetscape. So in New York City, we have seen our streets really transformed in 2020 from a surge in bicycling, near record high private car registrations to streets filled with restaurant seating. We've also seen worrisome exodus from public transit and a return to near pre-pandemic levels of car traffic. And not least, we've seen open streets with 80 miles of open streets that have seen New Yorkers really experience and enjoy our streets in ways that bring back memories of childhood and play outside. Transportation Alternatives is a nonprofit advocacy organization. We were formed in 1973 with a presence in all of New York City's 5 boroughs. We fight, advocate, and agitate to reclaim New York City's streets from the automobile in favor of people walking, biking, and using public transit. So I am going to introduce each panelist, and then we are going to go straight into the discussion for today, followed by Q&A. So please feel free to share reflections and drop questions, and we'll try to get to as many of those as we can. So we are joined today by Betsy Plum, who is the Executive Director of Riders Alliance, bringing more than a decade of experience in policy advocacy, grassroots organizing, and nonprofit leadership to win reliable, affordable public transit for New Yorkers. Andrew Rigie is the Executive Director of the New York City Hospitality Alliance, representing restaurants and nightlife venues throughout the 5 boroughs. And last but not least, Shabazz Stuart is the founder and CEO of Oonee, which provides affordable, secure bike parking to New Yorkers. So I want to start with posing a question to each of you, starting with Betsy, Andrew, and then Shabazz. It's safe to say that all of our work has changed dramatically this year. Can you share how your organization has adapted and changed focus in 2020?
Yeah,
Betsy.
happily. And thank you for having me today. I'm really excited for this panel and for the conversation. So I think what I'm going to say won't surprise anyone. Our work changed in a lot of different ways. I would say there are probably 2 major elements. First, we're a grassroots membership organization. That's relational work. It's built on in-person connectivity and energy, and that had to change majorly, of course, because it's a global pandemic. Reorienting all of that for such a long period of time to the virtual and digital space was a major shift. And I would say the other major thing that happened was that our fights have always been state and local oriented, but for the first time ever, we're working on the federal, state, and local levels, organizing riders for the first time ever. And just a quick note on that, as soon as the incredible impact of the COVID-19 crisis became clear, really majorly what it was going to mean fiscally for the MTA, we knew that we had to make sure that transit was included in recovery policy and funding decisions at the federal level. We knew that the problems we're facing far outstrip what city or state government will be able to do. And if we're going to protect transit, we need to go to the highest level of US government to make sure that in every single recovery conversation, transit is there, and that we ultimately bring home billions of dollars in relief for transit in New York City. And I think we'll talk about a few other things. We need a lot of relief right now, but that was a really major change, is beginning to do work at the federal level for the first time ever.
Thank you, Betsy. And Andrew, if you can speak to how this year has changed your organization, or how you've changed focus.
Sure. Yeah, again, thanks for having me. This is an important conversation. It's actually very similar to what Betsy said. We really focused on city and state matters, but we did have to pivot like so many other organizations, because the type of support we need, really, while the city and state can do some things to help, needs to come from the federal government. These restaurants, bars, nightlife venues, they've been financially devastated. And really what they need is cash for rent, for payroll, for utilities, for vendors, and all of these other expenses. So really focusing on getting the federal government to pass what's called the Restaurants Act, which is bipartisan legislation that creates a revitalization fund to help them pay for all those expenses. And then a similar one called Save Our Stages, which is really focused towards more nightlife venues, music venues, entertainment venues of that nature. And then while a lot of the advocacy work, we've been able to do it on Zoom, have our staff meetings and doing everything on Zoom. One of the things that we did do pre-pandemic, we had a lot of in-person training seminars. We had a big awards that we did in person. We would do quarterly cocktail parties for the industry. Everyone was so busy running their restaurants and bars, they often didn't actually get a chance to go out and spend time with each other in these venues. Obviously, we have been unable to do that. So I'd say the big focus is the federal issues, and then really trying to figure out how to repurpose and reimagine the in-person work we did in a virtual world. And that can be really tough, particularly for nonprofit organizations like ours, and I suspect for many others, when a lot of those in-person types of events are a meaningful stream of revenue for the organization. So trying to figure out how this all works, supporting our industry when they have no money, when they, have limited capacity to help support the organization, to support them. So just like everyone's really struggling and really pressured to figure out how to rework their operations in a pandemic world, we are similarly situated.
Thank you, Andrew. Shabazz?
Hi, and it's great to, Andrew and Betsy, it's great to finally meet you sort of in person.
Yeah, you're good on Twitter. You are good, man.
You are one of my favorite people on Twitter. I'm just going to say that.
Because in this post-pandemic world, you really need to kind of like make sure your face is ready for prime time. And I really respect the work you do. Andrew, it's been a tough year, and I've been following you on social, and it's going to be a long winter, and I really do wish you all the best in the upcoming battle. Marco, to talk a bit about who we are, what our work is, and how the pandemic has impacted our trajectory. Our goal is simple. We want to build a bike parking and service system for New York's cyclists. We think that if we're going to create a city in which using a bike is a competitive and primary mode of transportation, then using a bike needs to be as convenient as using the subway. And no matter what anyone says, we are far, 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 far away from that goal. When we started out our journey, we were working with the DOT. The DOT last year said that we were going to have a secure bike parking RFP. Since that point in time, we've launched 3 locations, 3 stations in and around New York City, 1 in Jersey City, 2 in New York. We took 1 up because of the lack of ability to have advertising on the side to pay for these. Thanks to the fact that the DOT isn't ready to support that work, that foundation. Since the pandemic started, we've seen several things. One, we've seen the stories and the narratives surrounding essential workers and their importance to the city's economy become front and center. we've seen more and more and more New Yorkers turn to two wheels to navigate around the city, primarily because we've seen a 70 to 80% drop off in mass transit ridership. And we've seen bike thefts go through the roof. And so on one hand, the value of the work that we're doing is more important than ever. On the other hand, what we've seen is government is more focused than ever on 1,000 different things, right? We've seen government really work hard, thanks to the work of Andrew and Transalt, to get all these open streets and to get these outdoor seating arrangements up and running. We've seen government really have to focus on expanding access to public health facilities so we can do testing and contact tracing. So as a result of that, we've seen a real sort of stall in what folks have long said is quite necessary, which is secure bike parking. We are building a system that's free to the city, but we're relying on the city to do something that it's never really done before, which is to think cohesively about what kind of infrastructure and what kind of plan can really scale throughout the city. We believe we have a model that works, but we really need the city to do something it hasn't really done before. Now, I do think there's a really inspiring model to be found in cities that are not New York, but are still in the same region. Just last month, Jersey City released the nation's first secure bike parking RFP, which calls for up to 30 stations in Jersey City over the next 5 years. Hoboken City Council authorized the nation's second foremost secure bike parking RFP. So we are seeing cities slowly start to move in this direction. We hope that New York will do the same. I think that when we look at our work, we've seen the need greater than ever, but we've also seen government busier than ever with less bandwidth than ever. And so it almost kinds of offsets. We're almost exactly where we started. But I think that people are starting to realize that micromobility is key and essential to the city's future. It's a key redundant transportation option for many folks, and that we've got to get this done eventually soon if we're going to get to a climate-friendly, sustainable transportation future. Thank you,
Shabazz. So, Shabazz, I really want to get back a little bit later to tease up some of the things that you raised. But first, just to go back to Betsy and Andrew, you both mentioned some of your federal priorities, and it seems that is really the main or a main focus of your work. Is there one particular major policy or piece of your work that you had to abandon in 2020, so that you were planning, let's say February 29th or 28th, you were really focused on this big piece, and you then had to abandon it completely. So if you could speak to that, if there was something like that, and then also whether the federal needs have to, how consuming they have been for your work.
Oh, that's such a great question. I think, I would say in a nonprofit, you never really have the luxury of moving something to the back burner fully. We just keep doing what we need to do, and especially in an emergency, and you add on whatever needs to be done, in this case, to save the transit system that all of us as New Yorkers rely on. Certainly, I would say there were things that shifted. We were really ramping up for a major congestion pricing implementation campaign. And right before the pandemic hit, congestion pricing got stuck with the Trump administration. It was sort of a foreshadowing moment that we were going to be doing a lot of federal work. But that meant that, and now we're feeling far more optimistic about congestion pricing, but there was some eased up capacity there. But I would say taking on our first ever federal campaign was a major shift. It took a lot of new learning to talk to our members. Why is it that we've spent 8 years talking about Cuomo's MTA, and now we're talking about Chuck Schumer and the White House and Nancy Pelosi and Mitch McConnell? But it was an emergency. We had to do the work, and we're going to keep doing the work and everything that we can possibly do to save transit in New York City.
Yeah, for us, I mean, we always just had so much going on pre-pandemic. It felt like we were working around the clock. The pandemic hit, and yes, the hours certainly increased. I mean, it was like, I joke with, maybe not a joke, with people like our members, say it's almost like opening a new restaurant when you're just going around the clock day after day, and it's one fire after another you have to put out. I mean, I think the biggest thing that we kind of put off was, I mentioned before, our big awards. Just because it's a big production, we could have probably brought it online, but it was just too much to think about with all the sponsors and the funding and the deliverables. And it was supposed to happen back in April, and that was really when everything hit. So we postponed it, and you know, we'll bring it back one day when we can all celebrate and be in a room. So that was like the only big planning. We had other conferences. We've done things on Zoom, as I mentioned before. But, you know, the pivoting to the federal issues, we had relationships with some of the, you know, members of Congress, both Senator Schumer and Gillibrand, and we were able to rally them. I mean, for both those bills, the Restaurants Act and Save Our Stages Act, both our U.S. senators are on it. Senator Schumer has been an enormous advocate with us out there fighting for it. And I think we have almost every single member of the New York congressional delegation signed on to the bill as well. So one of the challenges has been well, you know, we have support from everyone that cares about us in theory. You know, I don't think member of Congress or a senator from Kentucky, for example, cares what some restaurant owner in the Bronx thinks. So we have tried to extend our network. Many of our members may have restaurants or bars in other states, or they come from other states, and figure out how they can work their network to say, you know, you reach out to your senators, your members of Congress, tell them how important it is. And that's just been a little difficult because we're a New York City-based organization. So we've had to rely more on national organizations that have some more of those contacts. Even our contacts tend to be more in like the cities, in major metropolitan cities. So that's been a little tough. And, you know, when you run an organization, you're used to your type of advocacy and the pace that you move. You know, you try to work with others and create partnerships and alliances. But you're also relying on what other folks are doing in other places. And that's obviously tough, especially because what they do and the outcome of what they do is going to be significant in whether or not your restaurant's going to survive, whether or not you are going to continue to be able to employ people. What happens if you go bankrupt and you exhaust your personal savings? What happens when you lay off all your workers and they can't buy their kids presents during the holidays and they can't even afford to pay their rent? So that's been a challenging and interesting dynamic.
And how optimistic are you, Andrew and Betsy, on the federal government coming through with what is still needed on your end? We are going to have a new administration. How optimistic are you that we'll get what we need? Certainly on the transit front, there's funding to save the MTA, to save our public transit. There's congestion pricing. And Andrew, you mentioned the acts that may be changed even going forward.
Well, I try not to predict what Washington, D.C. will do. You know, the gridlock there makes our streets look wonderful. I would say, though, that we are in a markedly improved position with Joe Biden vis-a-vis Donald Trump. And I will say, you know, I can't speak for Andrew's work, but on the COVID relief bill and transit funding, we got it to a really, really good place under one of the most hostile arrangements in Washington, D.C. in decades. And so I'm hopeful things shake our, you know, now that we have a Democratic White House, things will be different. There are a lot more priorities that we're going to need to discuss. There's a lot of pain that has to be reversed, and those things will need to happen. So it's a different conversation, and we have to fit in a different way. But I am really optimistic that we will see movement, certainly on something administrative like congestion pricing, and optimistically really that we will see hopefully $32 billion for transit systems across the country included in a COVID relief bill, and hopefully soon, because God knows we need this money and we needed it months ago.
Yeah, I mean, I'm naturally tend to just be an optimistic person, but also a realistic person. The good news is the Share Our Stages Act to help the music type of venues have been included in the proposals. However, the Restaurants Act has not been, and it's absolutely shameful. If this package gets passed and that bill is not included, it really is going to be a stain on our country's history. There's no other way about it. You know, I'm hopeful that if they pass this now, another bill will be passed early in the new year at some point. But, you know, who knows what's going to happen with the 2 Senate seats in Georgia. That's really going to define what kind of next stimulus could happen. You know, this is kind of a bridge to somewhere, but, you know, if you're, you know, stuck on one side, which the restaurant industry is, you know, and the bridge isn't for you because there's no Restaurants Act, I don't know how far it's going to get. Yes, there's PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program money that's included. Probably part of another conversation why it's not great for the restaurant industry. I mean, I guess it's better than nothing. So I am optimistic in the sense that something may happen. There could be some money, but I am just frustrated and angry, frankly, that what we really need to get done after 9 months into this thing is not getting done yet. Hopefully it can, if not now, hopefully it can get done in the new year. But even then, you're looking at the Biden administration on the 20th. By the time they come back and pass something, by the time they set up the systems and money starts flowing, I mean, what's the best bet? End of February, early March? We're in mid-December right now. It's getting too cold to eat outdoors. Governor Cuomo has said indoor dining could potentially close as soon as next Monday or this coming Monday. So a lot of these businesses and a lot of these jobs, they can't make it that long. So I guess I'm as optimistic in a very pessimistic situation as you can be.
So I want to take a shift back to what we can do here in New York City. And I want to get to a somewhat juicy question related to the mayor. So next year, New York City will elect a new mayor. From your vantage point, and starting with Shabazz, what have you all's assessment been of, what is your assessment of Mayor de Blasio's 2 terms so far? There's still a month and a half. Sorry, that's the federal. There's still a little more than a year left. And what letter grade would you give him? And let's start with that. What has been your assessment of him, and what letter grade would you give him?
I don't want to get in too much trouble. You know, look, here's what I will say. I will say that what we have failed to do as a city is think holistically about what we need to do to get where we need to go. And it sounds like, and this is not, by the way, a New York City problem. It's a nationwide problem. We all want to get to the promised land, but ain't no one want to travel anywhere, right? So we have, you know, an administration. We have city leaders. This is not just the mayor, it's a city council. They say, you know, we want to be climate friendly. We want to live in a city where there's economic mobility. We want to see a city where we eliminate transit deserts. But we are going to invest $600 million in a ferry program, and we're going to cut the B46 bus in Brooklyn, right? We want to see a city where small businesses and restaurants thrive, but we're going to tell bars and restaurants that they got to shut down, and we're not going to use the city's considerable resources to provide an economic lifeline so they can one day when the sun comes out, reopen. So, one of the problems that we've had is a lack of creativity. It goes back to the same debate that we once had between FDR and Herbert Hoover about what exactly is the role of government. And we kind of have slid a little bit to the old Hoover kind of way of looking at where government kind of is best when it doesn't do that much. But let me just pose a question to you for the future. When we think about, when we think about restaurants and bars and small businesses, New York City is not New Orleans circa 2005. New York City is the wealthiest city in the wealthiest country in the world. We have institutions here that are well capitalized, that have liquidity, that are looking to burn capital. Why aren't we establishing a fund right now of $10 billion, right? From Wall Street to Silicon Alley, to help support small businesses and restaurants through this next wave of shutdowns. I just think when we think about calling on restaurants to shut down, think about the implications it has for the streetscape, for open streets, and then think about the fact that no one's actually saying, okay, here's our rescue plan, here's how we keep these folks in business. It speaks to the issues that we've seen in New York over the past, not just 8 years, over the past generation of like, this is New York, it's gonna be here no matter what we do, it's gonna be a great city. And we can ignore all of the things the fundamentals that make the city a livable place. And people are just gonna stay here. And I'm gonna close by saying, what's happened is not Mayor de Blasio's fault. What's happened is a symptom of a generational approach to governing a city, which is that, sorry, you're stuck with us. And COVID has exposed New York City for that way of thinking. And if we're not careful, we're going to end up in a situation next year where there's very little city left, where we are a city that has systemically said no to innovation and said no to improving livability. And I'm deeply worried. So I don't want to give anyone a letter grade. I don't want to focus on assigning blame to any one person or any one administration. But I want to talk a bit about this entire paradigm, the framework that we've approached livability and problem solving with New York City, and kind of suggest that it's been bankrupt and hasn't served us very well at all.
Okay, so we are 0 for 1 for a letter grade for the mayor. That's okay, Shabazz. Andrew or Betsy?
You, Shabazz, was spot on all those points. I mean, as far as letter grades go, let me first say, I never had good letter grades in school, and I blame the restaurant letter grade system on Bloomberg and de Blasio. As far as what his letter grade is, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt and ask me in a year. What I will say, and listen, I think with anyone in government, it's very easy to take shots at them, especially in the situation that we're in. I also want to do something that people don't often do, and actually give Mayor de Blasio and the city council some credit. They have done more, and I'm speaking just for the restaurant industry. We've had more legislation passed in the past 7 or 8 months to help the industry than we probably have over the past 7 or 8 years. Now, there were issues with the rollouts, the timing, and within those issues, there's tons of blame and tons of problems. But there has been a focus. Could they do more? Absolutely. We just released a whole list of 7 new policies they should enact. So there's always more they must be doing. But I think people saw when restaurants shut, particularly, and the streets were dark. I mean, I remember riding my bike around back in April and May, and at nighttime, it was just desolate. I mean, you realize when restaurants and bars were not open, the streets were dark. And when the streets were dark, there's more litter, there's more activity you probably don't want going on, and there's all these other impacts on communities. So I think there was somewhat of a wake-up call where in the past people used to say, we love small business, we must preserve our mom and pop shops, but then many of those same people would enact policies that would make it more and more difficult for those exact types of businesses to survive. I think that changed a little bit, at least when it comes to when it comes to the city. You know, Shabazz said something before about Hoover and FDR, and it's like people don't like government until they need government. It's like people don't like lawyers until they need a lawyer. And I think it's just gone to show us how important functional government is, responsive government is. And I think because of the limited bandwidth, which is amazing because, I mean, the staffing of the city of New York has gone up by, I don't know how many employees, but, you know, I think billions of dollars or whatever since, you know, the Blasio administration took hold. I think there's frustration among people because they are in a dire situation and they want 100% attention on their issues, rightfully so. And there's only so much government can sometimes do or is willing to do because the system that they're operating within is what they're used to. And there's always limitations. And it goes back on these webinars. I always use the old Churchill quote, don't let a good crisis go to waste. And I think this is the crisis. And what are we going to do to use the momentum that we have, the political will that we have during a crisis to make fundamental changes to our city, like open streets, like open restaurants, like, you know, all of these other topics we're talking about while we have the political will? Because my biggest fear and why I will wait until after the de Blasio administration leaves to kind of give you that exact letter grade is what kind of the fundamental change are they going to leave on this city? What is going to be the lasting changes on this city? And that will be the ultimate letter grade, in my opinion. And I think more so now than any administration in the past, at least in my lifetime, could fundamental changes be had. But I think it also is going to take leadership. And part of leadership is rallying the business community and really every single community. Going back to what Shabazz said, there is tons of money in this city. And a lot of it is just sitting on the sidelines. And one of the things that has been most disheartening to me has been this overall, the city's going to hell, everything sucks, I'm leaving, and it's a snowball effect. Instead of the people with the resources and the know-how to step up, quadruple their commitment to the city in all these areas to help us get through it. The mentality, and again, so not everywhere, has been, you know, let's kind of leave and maybe we'll come back one day when it's okay, instead of saying we need to stay here and fight through this and build it back better. And I just feel like there's a lot of negativity and doesn't jive with me at all. I mean, I think now the city has been incredible with the open streets. Anyways, I'm going on a little bit too long, but point being, I'll give a letter grade in the future, but I think there's certainly some areas where you could say they've done particularly good and then some where they've, you know, failed. But the restaurant letter grade only goes A, B, C, and then you're closed. So there's not even like a D or an F I can give.
Thank you, Andrew. So 0 for 2. And Betsy?
Oh, I'm not going to give you what you want, Marco. No, I'll say, in my opinion, I think the 2-term 8-year test isn't done yet. And so we can't fully grade the mayor. And I mostly say that because there is more than enough time still to earn a lot of extra credit and improve on the ultimate grade that the mayor will get. So we're hoping that the mayor hears that and does what he needs to do. But picking up on something Andrew was just saying, I deeply feel that when we look back on this period in the city, what we want to see is that the groundwork was laid for an equitable recovery, and that groundwork was fully enacted in the next administration. That's the, you know, we're at that inflection point right now. And so I also really agree with everything that Shabazz was noting. COVID has shown us how important our streets are, right? We can give riders more priority on our streets. We can give New Yorkers more priority on our streets. And that's something that we can continue to build on in the next administration. And just in terms of the next mayor, I would say we need a mayor who hires great people and gives them the loyalty and the support they need to do their jobs and to deliver the change that we as New Yorkers need. And I'm really hopeful we can see a mayor like that elected in 2021.
Thank you. So 0 for 3. Before we move on, there's a lot of questions about open streets. Transportation Alternatives did actually grade the mayor a few years back. So as part of Vision Zero, that is something that TA helped led to bring to New York City. We started a Vision Zero report card rating or grading the mayor and other agencies. So in 2015, the mayor, in recognition of bringing Vision Zero to the city, got an A-. The Department of Transportation got a B+. The last time this report card from TA was released was in 2017. The mayor's grade had fallen, maybe he didn't show up to class, to a B-. The Department of Citywide Administrative Services got an A, and the Department of Transportation got a B, and the New York Police Department got a C-. Anyway, I want to pose a question from Christy. Looking forward, do you see any positive transformation on our streets on the scale of Paris in the near future? Realistically, do you believe that we are looking 5 years, 10 years at a transformation like that, if you see it?
Look, what's missing in New York vis-a-vis Paris is an activist administration that is determined to institute best practices. I think, and I want to pick my words carefully here, Paris is in a very different place, right? We have a mayor that's outgoing. Paris doesn't have that. They have a mayor that just won re-election with a mandate. But there we've seen a really strong commitment to not just incremental change, but revolutionary change. With the 15-minute city sort of rallying cry as something that is a principle that which we can design a city around. We just haven't seen that here. One of my problems with Vision Zero is that it seems like a metric, not a strategy, right? Vision Zero to me has always been 0 deaths, 0 or less injuries. That's an outcome, but deaths and injuries are the most grave manifestation of a systemic problem, which is the design of our streets, right? You can never get to Vision Zero while Atlantic Avenue is a highway in everything but the name. Until we redesign those streets, we're never going to, or until we have a commitment to redesign streets like Atlantic Avenue, we're never going to get to where Paris is on their way to going. But I am very encouraged about a couple of things. I think COVID, as dire and as awful a situation it has produced in New York City, has led us to have I think, once in a generational societal reimagination of what streets are for. When you walk down Vanderbilt in Prospect Heights or Fifth Avenue in Brooklyn, and you see people understanding for the first time that we can have main primary thoroughfares that go through neighborhoods, be for eating and dancing, be for playing with family, children, be for meandering and strolling. That's never going to come back, right? People are never going to again look at a street and say that's for cars, right? Because for a year now, or for 8 months, we've seen them be something different. So I think that's going to plant a really important seed. So if we don't get to where we need to be the next 2 years, that door is open. It's Pandora's box. We're going to get to a place, hopefully down the road, where fundamentally people can imagine and conceive of something much greater than streets being places where you drive down the road.
Henry Reinhardt in the chat had a good thing on. He said grade pending for the health department, so we can give the mayor a grade pending. Listen, you can't really take politics out of politics, right? But I think there's two things that I'd like to see the next mayor do. One, they need to be able to manage the city. We are going to be in a dire financial situation, regardless of whether or not we get the federal funding we need. But there are going to be huge systemic issues that need to be done just from a day-to-day management, picking up the garbage and doing the day-to-day management that people care about and that are going to be so important in a recovery. The second is, I think, coming in with 2 or 3 monumental, fundamental changes to the city of New York, like reimagining our whole entire streetscape, but not just saying it, don't talk about it, be about it. So coming in with specific, clear-cut policies and a roadmap of how they are going to get there. And the third part that I would just tie into that is someone who says, you know what, I don't really care about politics, and I really do not care about getting reelected or even having a future in politics. My simple goal is to tell you what my vision is, get buy-in, get the political momentum to get it done, and implement it. As soon as I'm in office, we are going to lay the framework, even before I get into office, and do it. And then you will judge me in 4 years, but can't be afraid about what's going to be said to them politically, what it means for their future. They're going to have to come through, and yes, community input's so important, working with all stakeholders, all of that should go without saying, but really be so focused. And I think the use of public space, both for how people commute and how we reimagine, which we've done with the open restaurants, with the open storefronts more recently, how we utilize public space for commercial activity. And I think those two parts of outdoor space combined together could have an enormous transformational impact on the city. But you need someone with the personality that's willing to go out and actually do that, because these things don't happen easily. And they take trust, they take people believing in you, and they also take a level of, I guess this is trust, people giving you the benefit of the doubt and standing by you. I think you've seen what happens when you don't have the political support in all different communities. It becomes very difficult to get stuff done, especially to get big stuff done. So we need someone with a big vision, big action, and as I think Betsy said before, someone willing to put good people in place, trust those people to make the big decisions so you don't get caught up in the bureaucracy and red tape, and then hold people accountable.
Thank you, Andrew. And Betsy, in 2020, we've seen another transformative use of our streetscape. We've seen the city attempt to build on the recent success of the 14th Street busway in Manhattan and the prior success of the Fulton Mall busway in downtown Brooklyn, which has really been associated with an increase in retail sales in addition to better bus service, of course. How do you view busways and even services like bus rapid transit for New York City? And in addition to that, with just, I believe, less than 1 mile of the 20 miles of new bus and dedicated bus lanes built, what will it take to meet this goal and the need for more busways as expressed by many?
Well, I would start by saying that better bus service improves access to neighborhood centers all across the city. It more rapidly brings more people into the busiest part of the city, and that access is really critical to making our city fairer and better connecting all of us, which is something that I think after living through so much isolation this year, we know how important that connection is. But I want to drill into something you just said, Marco, which I think is a really important point. Busways have been associated with an increase in retail sales. We know that buses carry more essential workers than any other transportation mode, that they're fundamental to increased equity and access in our city, and that they also carry small business customers, shoppers, diners, and consumers. And that's a fact that has been utterly erased by so many in favor of continuing to enable, empower, and give first access on our streets to drivers. I think the fact that a car tends to carry 1 to 2 people is ignored. And despite the fact that a bus tends to carry 30 to 40 people. So I just think that fundamentally needs to stop. We have to share our streets at the very minimum, and bus lanes, busways, and truer priority. And I think that's where the whole conversation around bus rapid transit comes in. That's the least that we can do as a city. And I think it's just so important for New York on a good day that we be having these conversations, but it's even more important as we look towards recovery and what New York City will need. I think everyone here probably knows and has already opined about the fact that we have 6,000 miles of streets in our city. And, this year we've been asking for 60 miles of new bus prioritization projects. We were promised 20, and we're seeing the smallest commitment towards that, as you just mentioned, Marco. And so I think, where we are right now is we would like to see the mayor double down on his legacy of wanting fairer uses of our streets and ensuring that buses get just the littlest bit more priority on our streets. And that's easy, that's inexpensive. And we know if he puts his political might behind it, it can happen. And so I think that is the bare minimum. We're expecting it. It's been promised. It needs to happen. But there is so much more that the next mayor can and should do. And I think as everyone has really mentioned, it's about coming in with a bold mandate and doing it.
So on that, Betsy or Shabazz or Andrew, you have talked about the need for political courage, the need for a bold, visionary plan that also has concrete details for executing that plan. One question asked by someone, one of the attendees, is relates to parking. So when we talk about busways, when we talk about protected bike lanes, that often has to come at the in places where there's parking space, and we have lots of parking in the city, but that doesn't change the fact that it is a controversial topic. How do you view that? And the explicit question from Dawn is, how are you addressing the belief that people will want to drive more in the future and we can't give up parking spots?
Look, we have to be honest about what parking is. Parking is penthouse transportation in New York City. Most New Yorkers don't drive. So most New Yorkers don't even own a car. About 10% of Manhattanites use a car on a regular basis to get around. So when you look at who those folks are, those are people who are the top 5% of wage earners in New York City. The vast majority of New Yorkers are walking, taking public transit, and biking. And I know that there are folks who will say biking, that's not the folks like Steve Cozzo of the New York Post, but there are 50,000 delivery workers who are helping the restaurants, stay in business, and helping New Yorkers stay fed, who are on bikes, right? And you see them, every day and every night, carrying those bikes around. So New Yorkers don't drive; they bike, they take the subway, they take the bus, and they walk. I think we need to have leadership, and it's not just the mayor, it's city council, it's the community boards, it's a public advocate. We need to have folks who sit up and say, look, we are for people. We are for New Yorkers. We are for improving the lives of the many over the few. We're going to be asking folks to give up some of the 4.5 million free parking spaces we have on streets in New York City so that we can all live better lives. And we're going to stand up to what is, let's be honest, a special narrow interests, people who want to dominate street space in New York City so they can drive in luxury penthouse vehicles. It's luxury penthouse transportation. That comes at the expense of the vast majority. And I see it in very simple terms. You know, I grew up in Brooklyn. I don't have a driver's license to this day. I'm 31 years old. My mom never had a driver's license in the United States. We got around in the B41 bus and the D and Q, right, in the Brighton line. You know, like some of these innovations, some of the BRT, building more subway lines, bike lanes, is about making life easier for people who grew up like me and look like me. I see it in very stark terms.
Shabazz, with terms like parking and driving being penthouse transportation, I think at the very least today we've owned in on why you are indeed so popular on Twitter, as expressed by many. Betsy, Andrew, anything to share on that?
I'll second that. Penthouse transportation is wonderful, and I appreciate that. You know, I agree with everything Shabazz said, and I don't want to try to say something new because it'll pull away from it. But I think just one small thing, and you know, Andrew could speak to this so much more eloquently, but we have this conception of like New York, right? And huge swaths of our public space are given over to cars, despite the fact that, you know, as Shabazz just said, the majority of us ride transit or bikes, and the majority of us don't own a car. Yet that's our reality, right? That streets are usually 3 lanes, 2 are for parking and 1 is for driving. Yet in this pandemic, we started to see a different way that our streets can look like, you know? And so now I'm looking out my window and I can see 2 spots that used to be parking spots. And now it's this beautiful outdoor dining for a restaurant that otherwise would have probably had to close its doors. And so each night there are beautiful lights in those parking spots and, you know, New Yorkers dining and community. And to me, if we start thinking that way about a different New York that isn't so dependent on this special interest of cars and drivers, it could just be such a more beautiful, communal, and connected place. And it's simply that conversation that we want to be having.
So sometimes I should probably just, you know, keep my mouth shut and know my audience, but I have a car. We have a car because my wife used to have to drive upstate for work, and then we go back and forth to the Bronx a lot from Manhattan, and it was much more convenient. And I'll be honest with you, it is a pain to do street parking. We don't have money for the garage. I drive around once in a blue, depending when we're coming back, for like 45 minutes or an hour. It's just, it's miserable. But I gotta say, it is nice. It's quick, easy if you want to get out of the city or you want to go here or there. But that's a good way. It's kind of penthouse parking or a penthouse car. It's like, you know, if you're not in it, you're like, oh, look at that. But when you have it, you're kind of like, okay, you know, this is kind of nice. And I think there just needs to be a distinction made between having a car because you can just have one, or having it as a necessity. And listen, you could argue this, and I'm on my community board, and there's all these debates when we're talking about bike lanes or this or that. And yeah, some people need it. I don't know enough about, you know, residential parking permits, but maybe that's an option. But going back to like the political courage and all of that, it's no matter what you do, if you are going to make a big fundamental change in the way the city operates, you're going to piss people off. And people that have cars that are going to lose parking are going to be unhappy. But I think we also, in some sense, have a short memory. It is at the point right now where I'm the huge supporter of, you know, giving outdoor restaurants and other types of uses and more bike lanes and taking away parking. I know that that is going to impact my ability to park on the street. And honestly, when the lease comes up, if it becomes such a pain to find parking, we'll probably say, we're not going to get another car. Public transportation all the time. And the other point is, if we could get, because one of the things that we've been doing, especially during the pandemic, is going to so many different neighborhoods to go eat and support local business and check out what's going on. And we often take the bus or take the train, but there's just some neighborhoods that you can't really get to, at least not easily, when you have a 5-year-old kid with you, when you're trying to stay out and do all of this stuff, where a car is more convenient. So it goes back to, if we double down on public transit, make it easier for people to get around to all different neighborhoods, it increases access, it increases equity. And if it's also reliable, people are like, oh, wow, I can do this because it is easier. So I think it's also the way that it's positioned to people. I feel like sometimes when I've gotten into these conversations with people where it's like an attack on their car, well, it's like not about you individually, it's about a much larger system that's at play. And how do we reform it? If you're going to lose spots and it's a pain, you know what, maybe you won't have a car in the future, and that's going to be for the better. But I think it's going to take that political courage to stand up to people, be honest with them, and in years they'll look back and be like, oh my goodness, we used to have a car, like I didn't really need that.
I want to just, I use that term penthouse transportation for driving because I don't mean to be dismissive of the need to have a car. There are many people who, for whatever reason, choose to have a car, choose to drive. The reason why I use that analogy is because, look, the penthouse is nice. People like living in the penthouse. I want to live in a penthouse. It's very nice to have a penthouse, but a penthouse is made possible by all the people who come below. And a penthouse is priced like a penthouse. You got to pay extra for the penthouse, right? That's what driving is. When you drive in a city, it is quite literally the nicest way to get around on the ground in a city, right? You're driving in a luxury vehicle that is all for you. And just like the penthouse, it's powered not to use exercise, that mode of transportation, get around, right? You have people who are walking and and taking public transit and biking, and that's why you can have a road that is relatively traffic-free, that lets you get where you need to be. And just like the penthouse, you should pay for it. It should be a precious commodity, right, that you pay a premium for. So I'm not opposed to penthouses, and I'm actually not opposed to driving. We just have to rationalize the price of driving so that it is a precious commodity that people think twice about doing in the context of a city environment.
Thank you, Shabazz. So we're coming very close to the end. So I just want to have a couple of quick questions for you. One, I just want to go back to Andrew and also Shabazz, to Andrew, but referencing part of what Shabazz said about pricing and the restaurant dining. Andrew, outgoing DOT Commissioner Polly Trottenberg has highlighted really the challenge of giving space to restaurants in order for them to survive during these COVID times that is really public space. Some parts of the sidewalk and also part of the street, often taking up car parking space. That is public space. It is highly valuable. Do you have a quick solution that you can mention to that challenge of addressing the fact that it's public space, highly valued, and the challenge of basically giving this space potentially long-term to private business owners? Or do you just share kind of DOT Commissioner Polly Trottenberg's current assessment that this is a really challenging thing that we need to work out somehow?
I mean, I definitely agree in the sense that it's a challenging, I wouldn't even say, it's a complex issue, yes. But when you say public space, we as a city have to set our priorities. And I would argue that restaurants that had sidewalk cafes, they were so expensive. They were the only entity that paid consent fees, to my knowledge. Even newsstands, you get a permit, but you're not paying for that space. But it allows us to employ more New Yorkers, right? It allows us to generate additional revenue through sales tax and other taxes to help fund the rest of our city's operations. I believe it creates more livable streets. It probably brings more safety and activity onto the street, which is good, creates more economic activity. So I think there is a huge, not only economic, but social benefit to it as well. And I think kind of going back, what the Shabazz was saying about, I mean, paraphrasing a little bit, but like, figuring out like, what are our priorities and how do we want to create an equal city with equal access and bring people out? And I think restaurants have been part of that. I don't think that restaurants should be the only ones to have access to these streets. I mean, you have bike lanes, you have people that just want to walk. I mean, you have people that want to just like play cards or dominoes or something and set up a table. Like there's so many different uses. Some are commercial, some are not commercial. And I think programs like open restaurants generally have been very popular. I think bike lanes more and more get more and more popular. So I don't think, it's about how you frame it. I don't think it's just giving it to for-profit businesses. I think it's an acknowledgement that we as a city understand the contributions that these small businesses and workers and the product or service they sell or offer brings great value, and they deserve to have a piece of that public space, and it should be regulated in a fair, equitable way. And people in all different neighborhoods should have similar fair and equitable access to it. So I don't necessarily think one comes at the expense of another.
Thank you, Andrew, for closing us on that note. So thank you all, Shabazz, Stuart of Oonee Pod, Andrew Rigie of the New York City Hospitality Alliance, Betsy Plum of Riders Alliance. Thank you so much. And I want to give each of our panelists an A+, both for what you've shared today and for your contributions in your daily work to make New York City's streetscape the best it can be in service of New Yorkers. So thank you very much, and thank you to everyone for joining. Have a great day.